the electrons revolving around the nucleus, as described in various textbooks, is far from reality. What are your top 3 gross misinterpretations of scientific concepts?
Well, it's a good question. I would consider revolution electrons to, I think that scientific understanding is always changing, right? When Niels Bohr came up with the Bohr model of the atom, and in the Bohr model of the atom about 100 years ago or so, it was postulated that the electrons really were moving around in circular orbits the way planets orbit around the sun, right? And so at that moment in time, that was the best understanding of how electrons worked, right? So now we know more. Now we know that Bohr knew some of the story, but he didn't know all of it, right? And so folks like Schrödinger and de Broglie came along, and they came up with more nuanced and more sophisticated versions of where electrons are, right?
Yeah.
In 100 years, we're going to be totally wrong too, right? So in 100 years, people are going to say, "Oh, can you believe 100 years ago? What a huge misconception! They were so wrong." So I think that's worth keeping in mind. That's one of the beautiful things about science is it's always changing, and what we think we know for sure at any one time, probably in 100 years, is going to turn out to not be true. Yeah. So maybe, So I think for some students, initially introduce nucleus the way planets orbit around the sun. That's the way that younger students can understand how electrons work. And then once they have that sort of basic version, you can move on and say, okay, well, it's actually a little bit more complicated than that. Let's fill in let's fill in the dots. But if we're thinking about misunderstandings of what things are in science, right? If we're thinking what are things that students really do get wrong? Is in a sense or two. I think that not a lot of students understand that. I think that one of the biggest misconceptions in all of science is how plants get food. Okay, and this is probably the biggest misunderstanding in all of science. If I had a piece of wood, okay, and I showed you a piece of wood, and I asked people, where does a tree get the bulk of the material that it needs to make that wood? You say a person's got to eat food to build their bodies. They get they build their bodies from the food they eat. Where does that tree get the food that it needs to build its wood? You can ask 1,000 people, and every one of them will say it gets it from the soil. It pulls the nutrients up through the roots, and it sort of eats dirt. It builds the wood from the minerals in the dirt, or the minerals that are dissolved in the water that it sucks up through the dirt, right? 1,000 people out of 1,000 people will say that. Absolutely false. The true answer is far more fascinating. And it's that trees get the bulk of the material that they use to make wood, they pull it out of the air, right? This is the process of photosynthesis. Yeah. And every student learns photosynthesis in biology class, but nobody knows what it means. Every student can write the equation for photosynthesis, but they don't actually understand it, because if they understood it, they would understand that the equation that they're writing out explains how trees can make the material to build the wood. So I just think that's fascinating. The process of photosynthesis is telling us how trees have this remarkable ability to pull carbon dioxide gas out of the air, attach atoms from that gas together to make something that's solid. So that I think is the biggest misconception in sort of all of general science is how plants make food and how plants make biomass, how plants build their bodies.